be our distinguished speaker. Will has a great story to tell, and I asked him to tell me how to say to you in Chinese, welcome to the Port Hueneme Historical Society Museum. And I'm not even going to try, but I am going to ask Will to start off by speaking Chinese to you, because you really can't believe that this guy speaks Chinese, but he does. And he's self-taught, I believe.
No.
Okay, he didn't teach himself. He somehow picked it up. He'll tell you about it too. So, in addition to speaking Mandarin Chinese, Will worked on cruise ships, and he has a wealth of information about that experience. And then eventually he ended up working here at the Port of Hueneme for 17 years as a marketing director. And and he's going to be a colleague of mine in a couple of weeks, so we're excited about that too. So currently he is the Mayor Pro Tem, and we anticipate that he's going to take the next step and be the mayor, which will be exciting. So please welcome Will to the Port Hueneme Historical Society Museum. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Most people probably know me, if you know me at all, with being from the port where I spent 17 years. And if not that, perhaps city council meetings. However, I did have another career before coming to Hueneme, and I would just tell people it's mostly in travel and tourism, because it didn't begin on cruise ships. And what I want to do is open this up as much as possible, because there's things I can go on and just keep talking, but sometimes if I get a good question, it leads me into another direction that we never thought about before, and I can tell you my insights about cruise lines and things like that through your participation, your questions. I first walked onto a cruise ship in about 1982, maybe 83. It was a Carnival ship. And it was all the Sun, Fun, and Rum styrofoam. A lot of funny colors, very bright, very gaudy, very loud. And it was basically just a floating beach party kind of environment. My work at the time was not on cruise ships, with cruise ships, or any of that. How many of you have been on a cruise before? A few of you have. So you'll have some reference to start asking or thinking about things you may have seen on board, thoughts you may have had. We had passengers sometimes on board ask us, the morning paper, what time does it arrive? Well, no morning newspapers on cruise lines. Although in the old days, in the 70s and the 80s, they actually did print out a page or two of highlights of what was in the news, but the actual newspaper. But we had passengers who were thinking newspaper, not a sheet with just news. Anyway, I was working as a escort translator for tour groups in China. I started that job about 1978. And so 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, I was working overland tours in China. Towards the end of that gig, I started noticing cruises coming into China, basically in Beijing and in Shanghai, the two bigger cities, on occasion in Canton, certainly Hong Kong. But what I would see versus what I was doing, overland tours, a little different. You're traveling by train, you're traveling by motor coach, you're traveling by airplanes. In those days, the Russians only had these old Ilyushin airplanes. They would take off from airports and take off straight up in the air. And then they'd fly, and then they would come down this way and land. Very funny flight patterns that they would take. But in any event, I started seeing cruise line passengers towards the end of that. And most of them were about our age, well into their 60s, 70s, 80s, some of them even older. We used to wonder just how old these people could get sometimes. And of course they would come off the ship like a herd of turtles, go shopping somewhere, and then right back onto the ship, and off they would go. I'd frequently run into them in Hong Kong and in an elevator in a hotel or something, and they'd be talking about what they saw in China, what they learned, and it was always like they didn't see and learn very much at all. As you know, cruise lines you're in a port for typically a day. Sometimes you may be there for 2 days. That gives you a little bit more. But I always felt it was more valuable to travel overland, stay in the country, stay in the city for at least 3 days, to really get a feel for it. Eat their food, not the cruise line food, you know. The only thing to drink by way of alcohol was typically warm Qingdao beer. And in the early days, they didn't even have Qingdao beer. They had Baiyun beer, White Cloud beer. Anyway, I wrote a letter in 1983 or 84 to this cruise line that was doing cruises in the Orient, in Asia, from Japan, Korea, China, Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia. Great itineraries. In the summertime, they'd be up in Japan and China mostly, with one stop in Korea. Then when it got too cold up there, they'd switch on down to Southeast Asia. And in wintertime, not many overland travelers want to go to China. It's a little chilly there in the winter, and there's not as many tourists. So I found I had an opening of some time. And I didn't know what I could do for the cruise line. I had no idea what I was asking for. I was just writing a letter by way of introduction. Maybe there's something I can do for you here. Well, I got a telephone call back a couple of months later from a gentleman, Larry Cox, up in San Francisco. And he said, I'm with Pearl Cruises of Scandinavia. Scandinavia? I threw my name. He said, yeah, how can I help you? Well, I've got your letter here, and I thought that we could find a spot for you here if you'd like to. We have room for a port lecturer. And I'm at that point at a loss. I forgot all about the letter, actually. And I said, well, who are you again? And what was the name of this cruise line? And he paused a bit, and we talked a bit more. And he said, we have space for a port lecturer to come on board and tell the passengers about the ports of call. Great, I can do that. What are your ports of call? In other words, I'll bone up on it, study. And he said, well, we go to China and this and that. Oh, yeah, that's right. And then the lights started coming on. And we were talking about different things, and I finally said, you know, perhaps it would be better if I came up to San Francisco and actually met with you. I will be home in 3 weeks, and I'll be able to, I've got 10 days off. I'll drive up and maybe we should talk. He goes, yeah, I think that might be better. So I went up to San Francisco. Their offices were on the Embarcadero. Anybody know where the Embarcadero is in San Francisco? It's a great location office. And Peter, not Larry, Peter Cox was his name. And Peter and I talked a bit, and he said, our itinerary that we're looking at is we start off in Osaka, Japan. And then we'll go down through the inland sea in Japan. We go to Nagasaki. And then we go on to a place called Dalian, which is in what we call Manchuria, the northern part of China. Then around to a place called Xingang, New Port, which was the port for Beijing. It's part of Tianjin, pronounced Tianjin, but Newport was a new port. And they would take the passengers overland for 2 nights, 3 days into Beijing by bus, and then bring them back. And then from there down to a place called Yantai, which is on the Shandong Peninsula. And then from Yantai down to Shanghai, where they would go up the river in Shanghai and actually come alongside, not anchor, come alongside in Shanghai, downtown, right by the Peace Hotel and the waterfront, the Bund area. It's a great location. And then down to a place called Xiamen, which in Cantonese is called Amoy. You might remember Amoy from the when Chiang Kai-shek lost the Civil War, he went to Taiwan, but he kept 2 islands, Amoy and Jinmen, or Quemoy. And so we actually got to go to Xiamen and see it there. It was amazing how close this little island of Amoy is to the harbor of downtown Xiamen. It's from here to maybe Channel Islands Harbor. Very, very close. And yet all those years, the Chinese had never invaded and taken the island back. Found that quite unusual. So anyway, we're there and then on to Hong Kong. That itinerary took 2 weeks. And I asked him, well, what does he want me to do? Well, we need a lecture on Japan. Oh, okay, I can do that. We need a lecture on Beijing and a lecture on Shanghai. And then maybe one more on Hong Kong where they're going to get off. So, got it. 4 lectures. What else do you need me to do? Nothing. That's it. That's all we want. Oh, okay. So I said, what do I need to wear? I'd seen just like all you guys, those episodes of The Love Boat. I figured I've got to bring a suit and tie for dinner and all that. He goes, well, yes, you do need a dark suit. Do I need a tuxedo? Well, a tuxedo would be nice, but you can get away with a dark suit. Okay, and so I'm thinking, would a brown suit be okay? 'Cause the only thing I had at that time was a corduroy suit that I had made in Korea a few years earlier. And he kind of looked at me and said, I don't think, so okay, it's okay, I'll figure this one out. And so 4 lectures, no other duty. I could just go on the cruise. And I had a passenger cabin, unlimited bar bill, a laundry service, and I ate in the main dining room with all the rest of the passengers. That was fine. 4 lectures. And so I did my 4 lectures, went on the cruise, and I found it rather interesting. And a friend of mine said, cruise line's a better way to go for doing China. I said, oh no, we see much more overland tours. I said, and yeah, she goes, the beer is warm on the overland tour. The gin and tonic is cold on board ship. You have air conditioning, and you have a hot shower, which we didn't always get overland in China in those early days. I said, you got a point there. Anyway, that first experience, by the way, they paid me $600 a month, too. A lot of money. So anyway, in those days when I was younger, I never worried about what my salary was going to be, what I was going to make. I was more worried about what I was going to get to do. What's the experience? What am I going to get to do? That was much more important. So anyway, I stayed on board and for 2 cruises, so that's 1 month. 2 weeks down and then 2 weeks back up. Then I went back to my overland tours. They called me again a couple of months later, asked me if I'd like to come again. Oh, sure. I went back out again and I did my lectures, and then back to my overland tours. And then they called me and they said, we could maybe use you down in Southeast Asia. And we negotiated some more. And I said, I just really don't have time for it. And there's a dead silence on the phone because cruise lines, come to find out, are rather arrogant in their attitudes about themselves. We are the most luxurious way to travel, you realize. And there were cruise lines like Royal Viking Line, and there was Cunard, and the Sea Goddess one, the Sea Goddess, all these very, very luxurious ships. And here I am turning the job down for overland tours. And the guy finally had said, well, we're thinking about, we'd like you to come on and we'll train you to be a shore excursion manager on board the ship. I said, oh, okay, well, when do you want me to be out there? And he said, when can you come? I said, well, I don't know. He goes, well, give me a date. And he's got a spreadsheet out in front of him. And I finally said, well, after Thanksgiving. When? Maybe December, early December. When? I had to give him an exact date. He goes, okay, December 4th. And he's looking at his calendar. Okay, December 4th, we'll fly you to Bangkok. You'll catch the ship there on the 7th or the 8th, and you'll board ship. Life changed a little bit when I went on board to become a shore excursion manager. Now I'm staff. Staff on board ship is not treated the same as your enrichment lecturers, your port lecturers, and that. There are rules I had to start learning. I ended up working on board this ship as the shore excursion manager for the next 4 years. I didn't stay on for 4 years. My contracts were, the first contract was for 7 months on board ship. That was to cut me away from the companies I worked for previously on the overland tours. If you're gone for 7 months, it's like you've abandoned the job. You're not going to be available for that. So they kept me on board for 7 months when I first started. But then after that, I had a rotation of 4 months on and a month off. 4 months on and a month off. Wow. And I worked on board, as I said, for 4 years after that. And I got married and got off ships, but my first job after marriage was in the corporate offices of the cruise lines. My first cruise line that I worked for here on the stateside was Crystal Cruises. Many of you have heard of Crystal. Had no ship at the time. I was going to be the corporate shore excursion manager, so I'm setting up the tours, designing them, describing them on paper, taking photographs of the stops, and then they incorporate that into their short excursion brochures. I'm negotiating costs, I'm inspecting buses, and it was funny because Krista was going to go to Alaska for their first cruises, and then down to the Caribbean. Well, I'm a China guy, I'm a Southeast Asia guy, and I said, I don't know anything about Alaska. And my boss said, well, a tour is a tour is a tour. A bus is a bus is a bus. And the bus has to be clean like in Malaysia, right? And I said, well, yeah. How about restaurants? They have restaurants in Malaysia? Yeah, they got them in Alaska too. You got to inspect the restaurants. You got to look for bathrooms. Are they clean? You got to be able to tell the passengers, or not me, whoever is going to be my short excursion manager on board the ship, has to be able to tell the passengers, ladies' room is to the left, and men's room is to the right. You got to know that stuff before you walk in there. You got to pretend as though you've already been there and you know the place. You're familiar with it. It's one of the fallacies that often happens. Many times, you'll get a new crew that comes into a region of the world and they've never been there. They don't know anything about where they're going. It's up to the head office and to relay that information out. Give them things to read. Give them slideshows and stuff about where they're going, what to look for, and what to expect, and what have you, on the cruise side. And really, it's all about you, the passenger, and making you guys the happiest you can be. And definitely, crew, we know when you've had a good time. We definitely know. And we know when you haven't had a good time.
How many passengers, the first cruise you took, how many passengers were there? And did they have like entertainment at night and all that stuff?
The first ship I was on, the Pearl of Scandinavia, was a converted Baltic car ferry that Swedish American Lines and a company called Loritz and Kuhl had purchased, and then they converted it inside. We carried 400 passengers.
Oh.
Not a big ship at all,
No.
by today's standards. In 1984, 400 passengers, good sized ship. It's not big, but it wasn't small. Relatively on the smaller side of where ships were. But we would that you could carry 400 passengers doesn't mean that you do. You're going to carry maybe 350 passengers. Crew members, another 250 crew members.
Did they have a pool and stuff like that?
We had a very small pool. It was this ship was not built to be a destination. Today's big ships, they're destinations in themselves. You really don't have to leave the ship. You can stay on board and have your vacation on board. In the 70s and 80s, ships were being developed to go to destinations, and they were destination oriented. And of course, they followed the sun. The Pearl, the ship that I was on, followed the most important thing they felt about your cruise was your itinerary, where we're going to take you. And so we developed a different attitude on board that ship than I see on ships today. Today, it's about enjoying your cruise experience, which is going to mean the pool, the theater, the shows, the shopping. You can stay on board ship and do all that stuff, casino, etc. We had a casino on board ship, very small. We had a very small gift shop on board ship. But this is a ship that would go, as I said, all the way up the river into Shanghai. Go up the river to Bangkok, not 2 hours out of town. And many other ports of call where the ship was able to get relatively close. And but now, cruise lines have really not been around all that long. There were liner services. The oldest one is P&O. Anybody ever hear of P&O Cruises? P&O used to be the owner of Princess Cruises, P&O Princess. P&O stands for Peninsula and Oriental. And it was started back in the 1840s. And it was to take passengers, Brits, to India. And going down the coast of Europe to the Iberian Peninsula. These were not for tours. These were transportation kinds of ships. You can imagine, even on the Titanic, and not your thoughts about the Titanic, there's no stops in route for a tour of anything. You're transporting people. The concept of going to like the Caribbean, where you're going to be in a different port every day, that really didn't begin until the late 60s into the early 70s.
How about the Queen Mary?
The Queen Mary was a passenger ship, not necessarily for tours. It's going to take you to London or to Southampton. the concept began to change. Cruise lines, as they are today, and as they were developed in the 60s and 70s, 80s, they're built to operate every day. You don't want to take a day off with a cruise line. You need body count on board those ships. And you need to have that body count come back. We found that, and I spent a few months actually touring Canada and other US cities, talking for the cruise lines on local television shows. People were asking me questions about it. They trained us. They told us what the questions are going to be and what the answers should be. Some of the things I learned was, did you know that 90% of the people in America who can afford to take your cruise have not yet done so? And whoa, what an industry that could be if you could just get all these people to come. But people all have this image of what a cruise is going to be in the back of their minds. The Love Boat. One of the most famous shows ever, but that concept has really stuck with a lot of people. The P&O lines, they used to eventually, Orient stood for Egypt and then on to India. And if you were going to take that ship from England all the way to India, going out, you wanted your cabin to be on the port side of the ship, left side. The reason is you're hugging the coastline that way. And you can look out your cabin and you can see the beautiful coastline. And there's the city of Barcelona or whatever you're going to. Well, on the way back from India, you wanted to be on the starboard side. So your luggage would be tagged port side out, P-O. And then the other tag would be starboard side home, S-H. P-O-S-H. The word posh came from that experience of people out cruising. So the really rich, the really posh passenger was able to travel in that manner. But again, right up until World War II, these great big Queen Mary gigantic ships were really more for passenger liner service, not for cruise itinerary, stopping every day in a different port of call. Crew members come from all around the world. And that was one of the most fun things working on board cruise ships was crew members are always switching. You would think that you could bring an entire crew on at one time, but they don't. They'll bring a dozen on every port, and then half a dozen are going off for their vacations, what have you.
What countries were they from?
In the 70s and 80s, the best crew members by far were from the Philippines. Best trained crew members, and culturally they were super. Highly educated, spoke beautiful English, and have a culture that is focused on serving. They want you to have a good time. To the point where passengers would ask for something and they would say yes, when the answer is absolutely no, but they would go, yeah, we can do it. Because it's just embarrassing for them to say no to somebody. We have to straighten those out at times. But we just loved them. Of our 250 crew members, 200 of them were from the Philippines, which made our stop in Manila always a lot of fun because their families would be there at the docks. And they would set up a little kiosk, and there'd be a lot of shopping we could do right there on the docks. But then they were also doing their transfers. So many of them were coming home to be home for a month or two. Crew members that you see that are just cleaning your cabin, working in the bar, serving your table, what have you, they're on board for 8 or 9 months at a time. It's very, very tough for them. And when they do get a vacation, it's going to be for a month. And then they're going to go back for 9 months at a time. Particularly with crew members, and they all had families. You just don't see much of your family. But it was a great opportunity to make money for the family. These crew members are signed on to the ships by agencies that provide labor. The biggest one in the Philippines was a company called Magsaysay. Magsaysay was actually a former president of the Philippines. Some of our more senior citizens here might remember his name. But anyway, Magsaysay would provide our labor. They were all trained at the Philippine Plaza or the Manila Hotel. They knew service already when they stepped on to that ship.
I heard that you don't see many Americans on the crew because of the, we have so many requirements for health and all different things that other countries don't have. Is that true?
That is absolutely true. Americans are a pain in the backside to work with on board ship. You want them on as passengers, but you don't want them as crew. First of all, they come in thinking that, well, I should get a day off every week, at least, shouldn't I? No. Crew members go on board ship. They're on every day until they get off the ship. You're on the moment you step out of your cabin to the time you go back to your cabin at night. And you're trained. You know the passengers are kind of watching. They're looking. And so it's...
Don't they work real long hours? Too?
Depending on where you are, yes, your hours can be pretty grueling. The people that are running the restaurants and the buffets, they're up well before dawn, probably around 4 o'clock in the morning, 4:30, and they're getting up and getting breakfast ready, all the buffet stuff. They're done by 10:30. They go back at 11:30 and start lunch. Then they're done at 2 or so, 3. Then they go back again at 5 to get ready for dinner. And then cleaning up, etc. They're not done till 10, 11 o'clock at night. They get to bed, they're up at 4 o'clock again. And they'll do that again for 9 months, sometimes 10 months out of the year. And they're the most wonderful crew members you'll ever come across. I just love the Filipino crew members. We're just the best. But now, what about your beauty parlor? We use a labor company to provide that service. And it would be companies, depending upon where the headquarters of the cruise line was, then they would contract with labor providers in those countries. Great Britain is a good source of labor. So our casino crew, our beauty parlor, the massage, they all came from Britain. All of them. And they would come on under contract, stay for... Those people would stay for maybe only 4 or 5 months, and then go back, and a whole new crew come on. They wouldn't have that rotation 2s and 3 at a time. They would rotate the entire group out. The gift shop on board the gift. Ships today have huge gift shops with a substantial number of crew, and they found a lot of money in cruise line operations. So the cruise lines control that. The casino is not, though. That's a contract with somebody else coming in control. And the beauty parlors contracted out. All the crew members below decks contracted out. Crew members below deck are not allowed to be seen in passenger areas unless they're doing something, they're working. Otherwise, it's forbidden territory for them to go to. It's a very hierarchical existence on board ship. Highest ranking officer, obviously, is the master of the ship. He's the captain, 4 stripes. Then you have the chief engineer, or chief or senior engineer, 4 stripes also. His kingdom is down below decks where the engines are. We used to make fun of those guys because they stay down there smoking cigarettes or drinking coffee all day long. When they do come up, they're perfectly white. They've had no sunshine at all for months at a time. And they love their little cubby holes down there at the bottom of the ship. You never see those guys. You never see them. The captains, they come on for maybe 2 months at a time, maximum 3 months at a time. But typically about 2 months. Then they go home for a month and come back for 2 months, go home for a month. Their schedules are very different than anybody else on board ship. Of course, the master of the ship is just that. He is the master of the ship. Back in my day, we didn't have satellite communication. We had telexes. A telex is like a telegraph machine. Yes, thank you. It's like a telegraph machine. I would have to always telex ahead to the next port of call, giving them tour counts. They need to know how many passengers are on this tour, that, what have you. So I'd send ahead for tour counts and what arrival time, etc. I'd type it all out. I have to take it to the hotel manager. Hotel manager on board ship, also a 4-stripe officer. Actually, the hotel manager, he has the largest crew that he has to manage. He's got all the restaurants, he has all the cabins, therefore all the cabin stewards, all the waiters, you name it all. He has all of that, so that's a much bigger crew than the captain or the engineers have. And so I would take my telex to him. He would read it, put a signature on it. Then I have to take it to the captain. He would read it, put a signature on it. Then I can take it to the radio room and have him send it off. The days when the captain wasn't available, because it can't go without a signature. I have to track him down. Hotel managers, same way. I worked with the same captains and hotel managers numerous times over the years. They knew me very well. I could not send a telex without them having their signature on it. Even, I've seen them not read it, but they want their signature. It has to, that was just the way it is. Very hierarchical on board ship. It is like a military type environment. The 4-stripe officers are the senior officers. Next are 3-stripe officers. That is your chief engineer. Not the senior, but the chief engineer. Would be the first officer below the captain. He's got 3 stripes. The chief steward, the steward, he orders all the supplies for the ship. All the supplies. How many sheets do they need every cruise? Or how many gallons of ice cream? How many thousands of dozens of eggs need to be ordered? How much of this, how much of that has to be ordered for every cruise line? Imagine today's cruise ships that have 2,000 passengers on them. How much supplies they're bringing on. Plus your crew members, don't forget, you got 2,000 of them. So you're looking at 4,000 people that you're ordering for maybe a 10 or a 10-day, 14-day cruise. It's a pretty imposing job. Peter Tobler was the one that I worked with mostly. He was from Switzerland. And I remember Peter, when I first met him, he was bragging to me that he worked at the Peninsula Hotel in Hong Kong. Oh, yeah. And he had a very thick Swedish accent. Not Swedish, Swiss accent. And I said, so what? What were you, bellboy? What'd you do? And he goes, I was the executive sous chef at the Peninsula Hotel in Hong Kong. I still didn't know what that meant. And then as we got to be closer friends, he sat me down and he goes, Will, at the Peninsula Hotel, we have 95 cooks. We have 6 sous chefs. We have 1 executive sous chef and 1 executive chef. I was the executive sous chef. Okay, Peter, you're okay. But that's the quality of individuals they hire for these cruise lines. When my first ship, as I told you, was that where I was in headquarters for was Crystal Cruises, and we were preparing. The ship hadn't been built yet, and we were working on all of that. One of the most important people I saw in the head office was our cruise director, corporate cruise director, not the cruise director you're going to meet on board ship. The cruise director you meet on board ship, his responsibility is introducing the shows, scheduling them, and making sure that all the performers are in place and they've arrived and they have a schedule of the shows. He'll introduce the shows and things like that. But the person behind the scenes that has really put all that together is in the corporate office. He's the one that's recruited all of these various shows, found the magicians or found the singers, found what have you to perform, and it gets very, very competitive for many of these jobs. Yeah.
I found that the shore excursions, they're outrageously overpriced. I mean, you can, if you do some research on your own, you can get a better deal. You're not like a whole herd of turtles, whatever. It's ridiculous.
You're absolutely right. After 3 years with, later, and the last cruise line I worked with was Princess, when they were in Century City. And Princess, I was in charge of all ships in Asia, India, and Africa. So operations-wise, whenever a ship came into your area, that's when you go to work. If there's no ship in your area, then you're just prepping for when a ship does come to your area. Developing new tours. Maybe there's a new tour operator. Somebody that's new in the line, you want to interview them, see what they're doing. New restaurant, or a new site to go see. A new destination, perhaps a new island that you need to visit. So there's lots of homework to do when ships aren't in your area. But then when the ship does come in, again, you're in charge of all the pre and post-cruise hotel packages, vacations that people are going on. Then when they come on board ship, all the Shorex operations themselves. So you stay pretty busy. Princess would assign a person to regions. So as I said, I was Asia, India, and Africa. We had one person for the Mediterranean only. We had an entire company for Alaska.
Oh, yeah.
Princess Cruises Alaska, they were up in Seattle, and they were just for all the Alaska tours. A big job. We had another person who was just for the Americas, which would be on the East Coast mostly, but because cruise lines don't like the West Coast. There's just not much to see on the West Coast. No.
The Princess is going to Alaska out of Los Angeles.
Yes. Yeah, and when Crystal Cruises, our first cruise was up to Alaska, and we left out of LA.
You said there's not much to see on the West Coast. You're overlooking Port Hueneme.
Absolutely. Which was another eye-opening experience. When I first met the executive director at the Port of Hueneme, I was still working with cruise lines. And we were working on a concept to cruise the California coast. And a friend of the family, friend of mine, John Flynn, introduced me to Bill Bunger when he was the executive director at the port. So I get into Bill's office and I'm explaining to him a 7-day itinerary from San Diego to San Francisco. And we'd get out of the Jones Act by going to Ensenada. So San Diego, Ensenada, then come all the way up. And then when you finish, go back to Ensenada and then into San Diego. So you could do a 7-day itinerary, and I included Port Hueneme on that itinerary. Everybody in the office was going, where's Port Hueneme? What's this about? I said, no, it's a great place. You'll love it. There's plenty to do. So anyway, I show up, and Bill's looking at me, and you know, we're having a good conversation, and he kind of coughed, and he said, cruise lines, we do bananas, and we do cars. And I looked at him and said, well, those are fine, but you realize cruise lines are sexy, Bill. You got to think about that. And so we talked a bit more, and that was my introduction to Bill and his introduction to me. It was a year later that he gave me a call and said, would you like to consider working in Hueneme? So that was a transitional experience for me. But the port here didn't have an interest in cruise lines. They really didn't. And they still don't.
Wasn't there one time that we did?
Yeah.
Yes, oh, there's been
Had a
several.
good
There have been several
experience.
occasions when a cruise line has come,
Yeah.
but you
There's
can't
nothing to do here.
you can't mistake the port for the destination.
Good point.
And again, when we're planning our shore excursions, we have no problem taking you to a destination as long as it's worth the effort to get there. Therefore, Rome, everybody has to go to Rome, but there's no port in Rome. It's Civitavecchia or Florence. Oh, Florence, you gotta go to the nerve center of the Renaissance. You gotta go to Florence. But you go to Livorno. If you want to go to Kuala Lumpur, you go to Klang. And it's so if the destination is worth it, the cruise lines will get you there somehow. We actually, when I was with Seabourn Cruise Lines, and I was with them for 3 years, we had passengers in the early days going to St. Petersburg or Leningrad at that time, and they said, oh, I've seen Leningrad, I want to go to Moscow. Well, Moscow is only like 2,000 miles away, you know? And they said, yes, I know that. I want to go to Moscow.
Right.
So you make it happen. And I would call my agent in Leningrad and say, hey, I've got 2 passengers, they want to go to Moscow, how do we do that? They check with the airlines, they check hotel reservations, they do it all. We'll have somebody meet them at the airport in Moscow, get it done. Seabourn Cruise Line was the most deluxe experienced cruise line I ever worked with. $1,000 per person per day. That was staggering for us to think about. That was a lot of money. And these are passengers who had very old money, if you know what that concept is. They never worried about what something cost. They never asked the question, how much is this going to cost me? They never asked the question. They told you what they wanted to do, and you make it happen, and then they just paid. We were in the Mediterranean, give you another example of how this worked, and Mount Etna was blowing its stack at that time. And we started thinking, putting our heads together, what can we do to capitalize on Mount Etna? Well, we're going to a port called Taormina. And so I get a hold of the agent in Taormina, and by this time, I'm at the headquarters, so I'm calling and asking these questions in the middle of the night because, the time difference. And I said, you guys have an airport in town? Oh, yeah, we do. I said, got any helicopters in town? I'll have to check that out. Check it out. And give me photographs of the helicopters. I'm looking the inside too, because I can't fly over there to check the safety features and all that myself. And so he did his homework, got back to me, says, yes, we've got 6 helicopters. Each one can hold 6 people. Okay, those are pretty good sized helicopters. What we want to do is we'll transport them to the airport, we'll fly them around Mount Etna, and then bring them back. And how long does it take to get from the ship to the airport? How long from the airport to Etna? How long? So you time it. We had time to about an hour. And the actual cost per person was $900. And this was back in 1992, $900. Nobody asked. They just wrote the check and paid for everything. It wasn't a problem for them. Princess Cruises tours. We would mark up our tours 32% was the standard markup.
What about the
Not a lot, but tours, when I was a Princess, was a $20 million a year in industry. Just the tour department. Huge. That's huge.
Speaking of cost, well, can you talk about the solo supplement that keeps many people away from touring? And I've heard that some cruise lines are now doing single cabins because they're looking at that market.
It's all about butts and beds.
Right.
And they're hotel operators in one sense. Because every department on board ship is thinking only in their own silo. And that's something I found took some getting used to. When I worked on board the old Pearl of Scandinavia and I worked on board ship, 350 passengers, we knew, again, if a passenger was having a good time or a bad time on the cruise. If somebody was having unhappy with the meals service, the food's not good enough, this is hardly the quality that I signed up for, yada yada. I swing into action as a shore excursion manager, say, hey, you want to go with me tomorrow? I'm going to do the tour, but then I'm going to check out some more destinations. I got a car waiting for me. And I would take that couple on tour with me. And I'm the one that speaks Chinese, so they really got to see behind the scenes about a lot of things. They come back, they're not worried about the food anymore. Same thing the other way around. If I was having a passenger that was having a hard time on tours, hotel manager, restaurant manager shows up and says, we'd like to buy you a bottle of wine for dinner tonight. And they wouldn't connect it to the Shorex. They would just, no, we just hope you're having a good time. Here's a nice bottle of wine or something. So we always helped each other in that aspect. Small enough crew, small enough ship. Get a crew of 2,000 crew members and 4,000 passengers, you lose that ability to do that. Or if you still have it, that's a master hotel manager at work. In many cases, these big ships are like, you're learning how to shuttle passengers, and the best people that I've ever seen shuttle passengers is Disneyland. They're the best at this. You've got to have that capability on board ship to shuttle these passengers. My wife and I cruise a lot on Norwegian cruise lines now. The reason we go to NCL is because they have something called freestyle cruising. And freestyle cruising is no suit and tie. You show up like this, every meal, every restaurant, every time. And that's cool, that's fine. And they have a lot of restaurants. They have 2 of your standard first, second seating kind of restaurants. Then they have another half dozen or more other restaurants. And that's what we do.
But Oceana has that too, you don't have to get dressed up on Oceana.
Here you go.
And they're a top class.
Yes, yes,
Princess has it too.
yes. When the Crystal Cruises, when the Crystal Harmony was first christened, we had 2 restaurants on the Crystal Harmony that was that. And this was in 1990. They were one of the first to have this. And you had to make reservations before you even got on board ship. And so it was hard to get in. And so growing pains, and the cruise lines have learned how to get you in and out of those restaurants. And it's working. It's a good formula. It's just a great way to cruise, I think.
I'd like to ask you a question. How how do you determine the people you use for tours when you hit the port?
Oh,
Or
the companies,
your-
the
for
companies?
company, yes.
That's corporate headquarters. When I was at headquarters at Princess, I already would know these people, but if I don't, then I fly out. I meet the company, eye to eye. We discuss the tours.
Uh-huh.
And then I take their tours and I look at their buses. I go on board, I check the seats. You look at the radio, turn on the air conditioning, and let's see what it feels like.
And where they're gonna take you.
Oh,
and
yes,
where
this
they-
is where we propose to take you, and it's up to me. It's yes or no.
Uh-huh.
And I can tell you, I was in Africa one time. We were in East Africa. We had decided at Princess that we were going to go after our Southeast Asian cruises and India. All the ships now go across the Indian Ocean, up the Suez Canal, and now you're in the Eastern Med. You can start doing your Turkey, your Greek island tours and things like that. Then work your way over to the Western Med and start doing that. And so it's, you follow these itineraries. Well, at Princess, we thought, hey, why do we always have to go that way? Why can't we go the other way, around Africa? And of course, we're sitting down in the head office, sitting back thinking, oh, where do we go? That's when it gets fun. And that was one of the most fun things to do. Because you get your compass, you get your maps out, and you start measuring time and distance. The ship would leave port 6 o'clock in the evening. Where are you going to be the next day? Or where can you be the next day? Okay, if you can't be anywhere, okay, the day after that, 2 days at sea. That's typically the most you'll ever have at sea, right, is 2 days. Because they want those short excursions because they make a lot of money at short excursions, yes. And so they want the tours. So anyway, we decided from India, we'll go across the Indian Ocean and we'll go to Nairobi, which is the port for Kenya. That'll be the end of the cruise though. We'll conclude the cruise there. We conclude it there because we want passengers to fly out to Nairobi, do an African safari, our short excursions, and then take them to the ship. And we start your cruise. The people coming by cruise line, they get off, do their African safari, don't go home yet, and short excursions. So like I said, it's a big enterprise. Then from Nairobi, we went down the coast to Durban in South Africa. This meant I had an opportunity to visit South Africa, and it was a great visit. We did Durban and we did Cape Town, and we did the highway from Durban to Cape Town to see what the scenery was like there. It was great. Then up the coast. And Namibia, not much to see, so we didn't want to go to Namibia. And then we get into Congo, and we get into Cameroon and these countries here, and we decided we would, we got robbed in Cameroon.
What?
At gunpoint. We were touring, we were at a destination, and these three guys come up, and one of them's flashing a pistol, and we had the tour company that was taking us around, her father had been a French Foreign Legionnaire in Africa. You know, the French Foreign Legion, they were everywhere in those days. And he was an old-timer, and he was just insulted that we were getting, robbed this thing. It cost us a couple $100, and then we left. And then we decided, did we bring passengers here? No, you can't do that.
What are the pros and cons of repositioning cruises?
The repositioning cruises are the best if you like days at sea.
Lots of days.
Oh, they're, yes, very inexpensive. Do you like days at sea? And if you do, always look for their repositioning cruises. They're great. And you get a chance to meet crew members too, because while they're working, we used to have half of the people on board ship have been on board before. 50%. It's amazing. Repeat passengers are critical to the success of the cruise lines. Yes, we advertise and we want new customers. And we found people that would love your ship, and they come back to your ship, or we found passengers that were just sold on a cruise line. Oh, anybody that Holland America, I'll go Holland America every time. Well, what ship? Oh, it doesn't matter. I love Holland America. But because the administration, the way the ships are run, crew members, there's a set pattern there. So we found that very interesting. Half the passengers are repeat passengers.
But
Half.
they get perks too. They get perks.
Oh, yes,
for being
of course.
going
Get you on board.
to
We need you on board because then you're going to use the laundry, you're going to use the casino, you're going to use the gift shop, you're going to buy tours. And we'll get the money from you that way.
two questions. One is the shoppers, those shoppers, and they tell you to go to Jay's
Yes,
and this and that, and
Yes.
it's always, you know, they get a kickback, right?
yes.
And I'm sure they're more reliable.
There was a whole transition that was involved in that. Now again, I go back to my initial experience on the Pearl of Scandinavia. For us, it was all about the destination. Every tour bus that we sent out, we would have a crew member. It might be your cabin steward, it could be your waiter. We had a crew member that would join that bus. We give them a little safety kit with a little first aid kit, some napkins and wet wipes. And we tell the crew member, you're going on tour, and you got to report back to me what happened. Because if anything happens on a tour, we're not there. We don't see what happened. We heard your story, and that's one story. Then when you hear somebody else's story, the tour guide story, it's a different story. So again, we wanted a crew member on board. What we found after years of doing this is you're checking into your cabin steward's been to half the tours that you're looking at. And you could turn to your cabin steward and say, how about that Shanghai, the half-day city tour in the afternoon rather than the morning? It goes, oh yes, you're going to see this, because they've been on the tour. That was a wonderful selling point. They don't do that anymore. NCL certainly does not do that. They don't put somebody from the ship on your.
Does it cost you much?
To me, it costs nothing, because you are you got the bus going anyway. Then when a ship comes into port, crew is always practicing their lifeboat drills. Crew members have to have it down where they can do it in the dark with their eyes closed. Every time we would come into a port and be, say, port side, those crew members are off that day. So they're doing tours and on their own doing whatever. And the other side of the ship that's facing the water, they're doing the lifeboat drill. Next time we go into the next port, we're going alongside, we'll go alongside the other way. Flip the ship around. So every other port, you're going to be off. But every other port, you're doing your lifeboat drill. And you're doing it again and again and again and again. Because that's the most critical part.
Is there one country that has more masters than anybody else?
Norway. Of course, the Danes would like to tell you they do, the Great Danes.
What about
Do
Italy?
they have to meet the criteria that the state,
It's a world organization thing, the safety features, yes. And, it all started from the Titanic, of course. Look around on board a cruise ship, you guys have walked around, you've seen these great big white barrels. Those are all lifeboats. And that's in addition to all the lifeboats you have along the side of the ship. You have all those. There's enough space for twice the number of people on the ship. These barrels are actually, they're hooked, they're attached to the ship. As the ship would be sinking, you don't want to be in this scenario, the barrels begin to float. And there's this line. And as the ship gets further and further underwater, it breaks the line, opens up these barrels, and these lifeboats open up automatically. There's water and food and safety equipment inside, and they'll hold 60 people. Every barrel, and there's sometimes dozens and dozens and dozens of these barrels everywhere. And that's how those work. Every once in a while, you have to switch out the barrels because the food and stuff gets stale and it can't be used anymore, or maybe the water needs to be changed out. And what some ships like to do is they'll open up that barrel at a day at sea where the passengers can all come take a look at what happens when you open up these lifeboats. It's neat. It's really neat.
What was or is the intent of the James Act?
The Jones Act.
Jones Act.
The Jones Act was to protect American shipping, and it was Jones was I believe he was a senator from the state of Washington, Seattle, and it was the main thought was for Alaska transportation. If you wanted to go from one U.S. port to another U.S. port, you have to do that on an American flagged ship. What's that mean, American flag? Well, that means the ship is registered in the United States and the crew has to be U.S. citizens. So the cruise lines, they're flagged somewhere else. It's a flag of convenience and it's less expensive. And the crew, as I said, they come from everywhere in the world. New crew members rotating back in. They're coming back from Germany, from Austria. They're coming back from England. They're coming back from Norway, Sweden, and they're playing the most popular music in their hometowns when they come back with CDs. It was neat to listen to all the music that they're listening to. It was all American music, but it's different groups, and their tastes were different. So it was a lot of fun to get together with all these various foreign crew members. But again, the safety on board ship is a huge feature. Now, I'm disappointed with NCL in that they have their lifeboat drill in one of the lounges
Yeah.
inside the ship. I'm sorry, but, you know, and Becky and I always make it a point, let's go find where that lifeboat is. And let's find where it is from our cabin directly. And 'cause I'm not gonna, I'll have my life jacket, I'll be where I
Well,
need
my
to be.
question was, why was that act passed?
To protect American shipping.
It was a protectionism act.
Yeah.
Do you wish it would go away?
You know, American shipping, we can tell you, they can tell you over there at the port of Hueneme that there's one American flag ship that shows up every year that takes equipment and scientists down to Antarctica. One. There's just not very many anymore. But it's a cost-benefit analysis thing. It's less expensive to use ships from other places. Remember, it became an issue when the oil derricks were exploding off of in the Gulf of Mexico, out in the Caribbean. There were other ships that could get there a lot quicker with supplies, but they weren't American flag. That's a problem.
Okay, on my bucket list is I want to cruise the Nile.
Yeah.
And John keeps telling me that it's too dangerous.
Yeah. I wouldn't do it.
Why not?
It's too dangerous.
It's not going to get better.
No. I was in Egypt, and I was there, you know, not with the, I was there doing the forward work. I stayed in Alexandria and then in Cairo for a few days, and it was a great experience. I actually got to get an easy chair, sit down, and watch the sunset near the pyramids at Giza. It was unbelievable. The food was good, what have you, but it's just there's too many radicals there. This was in 1990, maybe.
So we met someone on a cruise that she was a travel agent. And she went on a cruise up the Nile and they had armed guards on the ship.
Yeah. I'd love to do murder on the Nile kind of riverboat kind of thing. Would be great, but it's just unlimited.
Do you know anything about river cruising? That's become so popular.
Yes. You know, there used to be in the old days, the 70s, the #1 premier cruise line was Royal Viking Line. And now there's Viking Cruises. And they do these river cruises in Europe on the Nile, on the Danube and on the Rhine. I've not been on them, but I've been told the cabins are smaller than on the regular cruise ships. But you've got much smaller number of passengers. You get to meet everybody.
They have more solo cabins too than.
I'm sure they would.
than ocean.
But you get to meet everybody. That's part of the experience.
200, 400.
Seabourn Cruise Line, where it was $1,000 per person per day, and we had nothing less than a 14-day itinerary. And so you're talking $14,000 times 2. If you go, a couple, that's $28,000. Did not include your airfare. And there was only entertainment every other night, and there was only 1 or 2 people. It wasn't a big floor show. And we kind of anticipated or expected that you will make your own entertainment by the people you meet and interact with and the experiences that you have. And you would meet some, Walter Cronkite used to cruise on that ship, and he had friends that would come on. And you would be talking to some of those fascinating people. So it was really neat. It was really neat. And Seabourn, and this is back in the early 90s, was one of the first ships that you could go to the bar, have your drinks before dinner, and call down to the dining room and tell them, there's 3 of us for dinner tonight. And they would have your table ready for you. That's really class.
I heard they were stuffy at that time.
That
I
was,
don't know
well,
about now.
you had to wear a suit, you had a tuxedo and stuff, and, Actually, as a crew member, and one of the things you have to understand about cruising is you get to unpack once, and you stay unpacked for your entire experience. Whereas when you're traveling overland, you're unpacking and packing, and you got to worry about laundry and things like that. But yeah, but you get used to it. You get used to
I'm
it.
just gonna
In
ask
rough weather.
Just a minute, Doc, just a minute.
Yeah, that's all right.
In rough weather, should we either be port,
Down on the.
Yeah.
or midship, where?
Becky, when she would start cruising, she would ask me, where should I have the cabin? We should be way up at the top. What's your problem? Seasickness. Okay, you want to be dead center of the ship. You want to think about it this way, because the ship is maybe hitting rough weather, seas, or the only place that has the least movement is right dead center. So you want your cabin not to be at the very top, maybe 2 decks down, and about in the middle. And that's where you want your balconies, the U.S. side. And you won't have so much motion. Although, we're going to New Zealand next year, and we've got cabins with balconies that face out the back. Now, that could be pretty rough, but you're facing out the back. That is going to be cool.
It's gonna be great, we did it.
What have you that'll be?
I was just gonna ask you, are you still involved in that travel business?
No,
As a passenger.
as a passenger, yeah.
I found that like Costco or like Patience to go, those brokers, you can do a lot better on the price than if you go like through Royal Caribbean or something.
You sound like my wife, Becky. You sound like my wife, Becky. Yeah. Yes, I
Well, I
mean,
get like a $500
You-
refundable cruise credit from Princess. I mean, if I don't use it, I get the money back.
here we go.
And
No,
Princess, then, you know.
you should shop. But again, we found passengers that fall in love with a particular cruise product. It might be Princess. It might be Royal Viking, it might be somebody else. And that's what they do. They stay with the ones that, but then they look for the bargains. The more times you go back, you get discounts based on that as well. Yeah.
Is norovirus a real thing, or is that just mass hysteria?
Cruise lines are super sensitive about anything that you can catch on board ship for the simple reason that you're in a confined area. We know if we've done something wrong to make you sick. Any restaurant in any city, people come and go all the time. You don't know where they came from, who they were, what happened. But on a ship, we know. The nurse on board the Pearl, she was telling me stories that she would show up in the morning sometimes about 10 o'clock, just as they're starting to clean up after breakfast. And all the people in the galley have to line up. And they stand there like this. And she's looking at hands. And then she gets to the end of the line, and then everybody has to do this. And now she comes down, looks at the hands again. And she's checking for any kind of uncleanliness or anything at all. Very sensitive about that, hypersensitive. So when you hear stories about, somebody's either brought it on, well, of course it's brought on, because it can't be generated locally. Those kitchens are immaculate. They work very, very hard. They take it very, very seriously, simply because we're all in this room and we can't get out. So if somebody catches something, we're all going to catch it. Scary.
So it's real?
It's real.
It's not just a psychosomatic?
No, it can be real. So they're always cleaning. They're always cleaning, always vacuuming, always wiping down, always. Yeah. They want to be as clean as possible. Let's see if I got to everything I wanted to talk about. Changes in ship's design. You guys have all seen the ships with the balconies now, right? There we go, ships with balconies. I've seen some new designs now where, as the ship is coming towards the aft and towards the back of the ship, the balconies wrap around the end, and then they stop, right? Well, I've seen some new ones that are now wrapping inside. And now your balcony is looking, not the water's over there, you're looking down into where the swimming pool area would be.
The Royal Caribbean has that where they're looking at in, what they call,
Down here?
Central Park or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the water park, and so now your balcony is not on the outside, it's on the inside looking in. I don't think I would like that. It's noisy down there. You got the loud music and the people doing all the rumba dancing and things like that. No, I think it's a little too noisy. But, at the back, it'd be
The
okay.
back is good.
The back is good.
We did that in the Caribbean.
Super exclusive cruise lines typically have, the most exclusive, it's one crew member, one passenger. That's an element and level of service that is the best. Carnival cruise lines, it's, 1 to 3, 1 to 4. The Carnival ships they want to get you on. Carnival has one of the most interesting sales philosophies. Carnival bought Holland America. They bought Princess. They bought Cunard. They've bought many other cruise lines. Well, they walk into a travel agent's office, and the travel agent's, oh, Carnival. Nothing. My clients aren't Carnival people. They don't want to get on for $60 a day. They want a cruise experience. Oh, well then how about Holland America? Well, they're a little wealthier than that. We're in Montecito. Oh, well how about Seymour? And the one Carnival rep can now sell you the whole gamut of experiences. You can't kick them out of the office. You can't. So they can make sales. In the old days when Carnival was first starting, they were by far the dominant cruise line in terms of passengers and everything. That's what you were getting on for $100 a day. And that was your per diem. There's a per diem that the cruise line costs. Each passenger, the amount of food that the steward's going to order and what have you. There's a set figure. How many dollars per day does it cost per person? And it's a formula that they have to. And that's where you're making your money. And so Carnival, they had it down. If you're doing the Mexican Riviera, the 3-day cruise, that's $60 a day. It's really inexpensive. Yeah.
Well, are they incorporating gratuities now into
Yeah, they are.
packages?
Yeah, they are.
Because that used to be very scattered.
Yeah, they are. So, the good ones will always be rewarded and the bad ones will be rewarded. But, they're coming from countries that don't make much money anyway. And if you're a 2-stripe officer or above, you're not getting tipped anyway. This is only for the cabin stewards and for the waiters. That's all it's getting.
You can always give the ones you really like more.
Sure, absolutely. But we think it's quite enough anyway. What is it, $3 a day per person? That's pretty good tip.
But you can opt out if it's really bad. If your service is really bad, you can.
One of the things we did at Princess that we didn't like is we taught our passengers how to complain. And if on a Shorex, they would bring the description of the Shorex to the Shorex manager and say, well, it says here we had a 30-minute stop, but it was actually, we only stayed 15 minutes, and and so they would refund them half the cost of the tours. And on my original ship, we would have never refunded you unless we refund everybody. And that we determined something was wrong. But we're teaching them to complain so they can come back and get half cost on their shore excursions. But you're right. Do your homework. You can get shore excursions with an Uber driver, a Lyft driver. That's cheaper now. There's another site too. Becky uses a lot. You hire local guides. I forget the name of the site.
Yeah. Sometimes the hotels, if you're in a port and you go to, the flagship Marriott, which
Sure.
I've done, because these people are bonded, these people have been tested, somebody knows who,
Yes.
and I did that in Rio. It was priceless. It was
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah.
Exactly.
But you had better be back at the ship when it leaves.
Not today, actually, because they know. You slide your card when you leave the ship now, right? You slide a card. So they know exactly who's off and who's on. We used to have to set just a piece of paper, and I would say we've got 35 buses, and they're numbered. And then you've got a list, 1 through 35, and when the bus would come back, and you're coming up and they're checking your card, your ID card, they're also checking off the bus number.
But in Oceania one time, we were in Asia somewhere, I can't remember where, Indonesia, I think. Anyway, we had a police escort. Everybody had to have a police escort to get us out of town and come back. We were 2 hours late
And the ship
getting
was.
back, but they waited because
They know
it was
you're gone.
on the ship.
If we know you're gone, if they know you're gone, they'll wait.
But they won't wait if you take your own trip.
That's true.
Oh, that's
Right. A lot of people, I
had experience with Princess, and the people were, it was a Hawaiian cruise, and the people made their airfare with Princess. They were coming from Canada,
yeah,
and the airline had a strike. They missed the cruise. So Princess put them up in a hotel, and of course they had to wait 5 days until our first port. So these people had 5 days in LA, Disneyland, Universal City, of course they had to pay for that. And then they flew them to our first port. And they had a good deal because
let me give you a couple of examples of emergencies that I've experienced when I was with cruise lines. Pearl of Scandinavia, not an emergency. We actually had a cruise that didn't sell. It just wasn't enough passengers to go. But we were in Southeast Asia, so we advertised a 3-day cruise to nowhere out of Singapore. And we went in and we said, we'll just take you out ocean overnight. And all the Chinese would come on board, and they would gamble all night long on the ship. And it's hilarious because they would gamble in 3 rows. The first person sitting at the table has control of whether they're going to take a hit or not, blackjack. Person behind them is betting on what they're going to do, and the behind is betting on that. So, well, it was just crowded all night long, and they ate all our food. They ate everything that we had was gone. Crystal Harmony actually caught on fire in the Caribbean on its maiden cruise in the Caribbean. That's scary. Fires are not good things on board ship. So anyway, the ship, it was in the engine room. It was the auxiliary engine room, which has all the wiring. We were just finishing first seating dining. In those days, they still had first, second seating. Just finishing first seating. Captain comes on the intercom, explains to everybody, nothing to worry about. And he got us all to leave our tables, go to our cabins, get our life jackets, and get outside. No problem. It's just fine. There's no danger here. But just for drill, I think we should just try this. He talked us all into it, and it was like, we did it. So we went out, and sure enough, all the lights went out. And those cruise ships, there's a reason they're painted white, because they reflect sunlight. It took less than 20 minutes for the temperature inside the ship to go up by 20 degrees. So, can't sleep inside. And we're in the Caribbean. We're halfway between Curaçao and Panama. And we're dead in the water. Fire's out, but we're dead in the water. And it's hot inside. You can't sleep inside the ship. So all the crew and all the passengers were dragging our mattresses out to the open decks. And we're sleeping outside. Well, it's the Caribbean. A little squall comes by every once in a while, raining on everybody. And you got to pull your mattress back underneath something and then go back out again. We stayed 3 days that way. It was 3 days. So the first day is when we eat all of the perishable items, all the fresh fruit, any pastries left over, ice cream, things like that. Then they set up barbecues outside on the open decks. So now, they're trying to fix the ship. They're trying to rewire to get us back underway again, and it wasn't working. Sure enough, no sooner do these ocean-going tugs come, and they're in sight, and they got one engine started. And all these Norwegian engineers down there cheering with their screwdriver and their beer in the other hand. They got it done. We got it done. And so we start going back at like 3 knots, 4 knots towards Colombo. And we get there. And there's the president of Crystal Cruises, the vice president, all the brass. They had, a check for your cruise. They had your free cruise here, and they had 3 airports in America. And we had already communicated with where they needed to go. Here's your free flight to this airport, and then you're going on to do the. Warren Titus at Seabourn Cruise Line. Every woman that cruised on that ship got a bouquet of red roses at home when she got home. Everyone. And we had no problems. That was just part of the cruise experience. You get roses in it. Thank you for cruising with us.
Were the restrooms working too?
No, nothing was working. So wait. So restrooms are not electrical. They were. They're not electrical. And so there was one other emergency experience. We were in NCL ship, and we had left Melbourne, and we were on our way to New Zealand. Wake up in the morning, Becky looks outside, and she goes, we're not moving. And I'm listening, and have any of you had an opportunity to spend the night on the Queen Mary, Long Beach?
Yes.
The sound, how it carries. Metal ships carries the sound. You can hear your neighbor like they're in the same cabin with you. But when you turn an engine on and you get this vibration going, now you can't hear anything. Well, we had no vibration. I looked outside, hey, right, we're not moving. But there was electricity. And so, okay, and the air conditioning was working. And what we found, it was just down in where the propeller was, and that wasn't moving. So we had electricity, but we were dead in the water, and they had to come get us and tow us back to Melbourne. So now we had like 2 or 3 days in Melbourne to do what we're going to do. Well, a lot of people were very upset because they wanted to go on to New Zealand. That was on the cruise. So they made arrangements for them to fly from Melbourne to Auckland, which they did. But then all the hotels in Auckland filled up. Now there's no space anymore. And Becky and I were thinking, wait a minute, we got a free hotel here in Melbourne. We got free meals. Let's stay here in Melbourne. And we'll go to New Zealand another time. That'll be next year. We'll go back and do it again. Because we got a free cruise out of it from the cruise line. They took care of the emergency as best they could. Remember I mentioned about entertainment, how important it is on the ship and as they get more modern? Well, the Jersey Boys were playing in Melbourne that week, 2 weeks. I don't know, well, the day we're there, they weren't playing. We get back to the ship, and the ship announces, the Jersey Boys are playing downtown. Yeah, we saw that, but they're not playing tonight. Yes, they're playing here on board ship. So they said they had played on board one of the NCL ships a few years ago. Remembered the experience, said, sure, we'll come for nothing. We understand what the passengers are going through. So that was cool, because they're going to see that. So there's, lots of ways to handle these emergencies. And the better you're at it, you get loyal customers coming back. Trying to think of any other stories about this. Ship design, balconies, restaurants.
So how many cruises have you been on?
Well, do I count the ones that I was working on board?
Yes.
Gee, a couple hundred.
What was the best one?
Best cruise I've ever been on. It would be on the Pearl because it was all about passenger experience, and we feed off how much fun you guys are having. You'd be shocked. The more fun you're having, the more fun we're having. It's infectious. And so, but it would be no one particular cruise. Some of the ports of call were very exotic, a lot of fun to go to, but you're with people. One of my experiences in the corporate office, we wanted to open up a new destination at a place called Nias. Nias is an island off the west coast of Sumatra. Sumatra is a big island in Indonesia. The only way to get there is the way I was doing it. I flew from San Francisco to Singapore, and that was like 18 hours. And then stayed in Singapore for a few hours, met up with Jimmy Sim, who was our agent in Singapore. We flew Singapore to Medan. I was on the island of Sumatra. Then from Medan to Nias. That last flight, Medan to Nias, I swear, there are actually chickens and other little animals on board the airplane to get there. We landed at the airport, and there was an old beat-up Toyota Land Rover 4Runner waiting to pick us up. And then we drove another 4 hours to get down to this little village that was supposed to be so really neat. And we get there, and it's still daylight. And it's like, I'm so tired. It's been a day, 2 days that I've been traveling straight. And the tour company down there, they don't speak very good English, and they say, okay, we ready to go? We go up top mountain. And I saw it's up there in an escarpment. There's a Neolithic village up there. Yes, that is. You go see who you'd like. Okay, tomorrow morning? No, we go down. How are we going to get up there? We go truck. And they had these old 2.5-ton Army trucks from World War II that were left there. We go take that. This was for Seaboard. $1,000 per person per day. This is for Seaboard. And I go, no, I don't think this is gonna happen. No, you go see, you like, we go together. Okay, so we jump in the truck, we go up there. It was one of these longhouses village where the headhunters used to live and stuff. It was a true Neolithic village. It was outstanding. It was so neat up there. And I said, yes, we're gonna come. The passengers will love it. This will go nuts. And then we worked our way back down, and now it's getting to be 4 or 5 o'clock our time, and not San Francisco time, but their time there. So I can finally begin to settle down. It's time to go to sleep. They had a nice hotel there. The only way to get to this place was the way I had done it, or via ship. And there was a pier there. They did have a ferry boat that would bring passengers over from Sumatra to this island. That was the only way to get there. So we're sitting there, and now the sun's starting to set, and we're looking at this perfect bonsai curl pipeline surf break. And it's perfect. And the sun was setting in the ocean, and that there was that one moment where the sun is inside the curl, and you see they've got these Australian kids out there surfing. Australians know all these places in Southeast Asia. And we're sitting there drinking our gin and tonics, and I'm so tired, I'm looking, and I look over at Jimmy. He looks at me, and he was the one that said it first. He said, what am I doing here with you? And it's true. When you're in the head office doing the corporate work, you're traveling all around, but you're not on a date. You're there to work, and you're not meeting. You're meeting all your contributors, but it's not like traveling the world and having a really great time. What am I doing here with you? But it was true. But that's what it would be like a lot of times when you're going ahead of the ship. Typically, I would go 2 years ahead of the ship for new destinations and things like that. Because they print the brochure for the next year, right? It has to have some shelf life. So you have to really look really far ahead. And that one time that Princess did the Slave Coast and Côte d'Ivoire and all that stuff, Gabon, what have you. One time, that's all. That was enough. But it was an adventure. It was really an adventure. I've gone an hour and a half.
That's enough.
Thank you all for coming.